coping with the anxiety of illness or the tragedy of bereavement. And I'm deeply sorry to say that the number of people that have been taken from us has surpassed 100,000, as the House was discussing only an hour or so ago. And I know that the House will join me in offering condolences to all those who have lost loved ones. The most important thing we can do to honour their memory is to persevere against this virus with ever greater resolve, and that's why we've launched the biggest vaccination programme in British history. 3 weeks ago I reported that the UK had immunised 1.3 million people. Now that figure has multiplied more than fivefold to exceed 6.8 million people, more than any other country in Europe, and over 13% of the entire adult population. In England, we've now delivered first doses to over 4/5 of those aged 80 or over, and over half of those aged between 75 and 79, and 3/4 of elderly care home residents. And though it remains an exacting target, we are on track to achieve our goal of offering a first dose to everyone in the top 4 priority groups by the middle of February. I can also reassure the House that all current evidence shows that both the vaccines we are administering remain effective against the new variant that was first identified in London and the South East by means of our world-leading capability in genomic sequencing. The UK has now sequenced over half of all COVID-19 viral genomes that have been submitted to the global database, 10 times more than any other country. And yesterday, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, announced our new variant assessment platform, through which we will work with the World Health Organization to offer our expertise to help other countries. Because a new variant anywhere poses a potential threat everywhere. To guard against this danger, we must also take additional steps to strengthen our borders to stop those strains from entering the UK. We've already temporarily closed all travel corridors, and we're already requiring anyone coming into this country to have proof of a negative COVID test taken in the 72 hours before leaving. They must also complete a passenger locator form, which must be checked before they board and then quarantine on arrival for 10 days. I want to make clear that under the stay-at-home regulations, it is illegal to leave home to travel abroad for leisure purposes. And we will enforce this at ports, at airports, by asking people why they are leaving and instructing them to return home if they do not have a valid reason to travel. We have also banned all travel from 22 countries where there is a risk of known variants, including South Africa, Portugal, and South American nations. And in order to reduce the risk posed by UK nationals and residents returning home from these countries, I can announce that we will require all such arrivals who cannot be refused entry to isolate in government-provided accommodation, such as hotels, for 10 days without exception. They will be met at the airport and transported directly into quarantine. The Department for Health and Social Care is working to establish these facilities as quickly as possible. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will set out the details of our plans in her statement shortly. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has this morning spoken to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland. And as we have throughout this pandemic, we will be working closely with the DAs to implement these new measures so that where possible we continue with a UK-wide approach. Mr. Speaker, it was the emergence of a new variant, up to 70% more transmissible, that forced England back into lockdown, and I know everyone yearns to know how much longer we must endure these restrictions, with all their consequences for jobs, livelihoods, and, most tragically of all, the life chances of our children. We will not persist for a day longer than is necessary, but nor can we relax too soon. Because if we do, we run the risk of our NHS coming under still greater pressure, compelling us to reimpose every restriction and sustain those restrictions for longer. So far, our efforts do appear to have reduced the R rate, but we do not yet have enough data to know exactly how soon it will be safe to reopen our society and economy. At this point, we don't have enough data to judge the full effect of vaccines in blocking transmission. nor the extent and speed with which the vaccines will reduce hospitalisations and deaths, nor how quickly the combination of vaccinations and the lockdown can be expected to ease the pressure on the NHS. What we do know is that we remain in a perilous situation, with more than 37,000 patients now in hospital with COVID, almost double the peak of the first wave. But the overall picture should be clearer by mid-February. By then, we will know much more about the effect of vaccines in preventing hospitalisations and deaths, using data from the UK, but also other nations like Israel. We will know how successful the current restrictions have been in driving down infections. We will also know how many people are still in hospital with COVID, which we simply can't predict with certainty today. So we will then be in a better position to chart a course out of lockdown without risking a further surge that would overwhelm the NHS. When I announced the lockdown, I said we would review its measures in mid-February once the most vulnerable had been offered the first dose of the vaccine. So I can tell the House that when Parliament returns from recess in the week commencing the 22nd of February, subject to the full agreement of the House, Mr. Speaker, we intend to set out the results of that review and publish our plan for taking the country out of lockdown. That plan will, of course, depend on the continued success of our vaccination programme, the capacity of the NHS, and on deaths falling at the pace we would expect as more people are inoculated. Our aim will be to set out a gradual and phased approach towards easing the restrictions in a sustainable way, guided by the principles we've observed throughout the pandemic, beginning with the most important principle of all, that reopening schools must be our national priority. And the first sign of normality beginning to return should be pupils going back to their classrooms. I know how parents and teachers need as much certainty as possible, including 2 weeks' notice of the return of face-to-face teaching. So I must inform the House that for the reasons I have outlined, it will not be possible to reopen schools immediately after the February half-term. And I know how frustrating that will be for pupils and teachers who want nothing more than to get back to the classroom, and for parents and for carers who spent so many months juggling their day jobs, not only with homeschooling, but with meeting the myriad other demands of their children from breakfast until bedtime. And I know too the worries we all share about the mental health of our young people during this prolonged period of being stuck at home. So our plan for leaving the lockdown will set out our approach towards reopening schools. If we achieve our target of vaccinating everyone in the four most vulnerable groups with their first dose by the 15th of February, and every passing day sees more progress towards that goal, then those groups that have developed immunity from the virus about 3 weeks later, that is by the 8th of March, we hope it will therefore be safe to begin the reopening of schools from Monday, the 8th of March, with other economic and social restrictions being removed thereafter as and when the data permits. Then or thereafter, I should say, Mr. Speaker. As we're extending the period of remote learning beyond the middle of February, I can confirm that the government will prolong arrangements for providing free school meals for those eligible children not in school, including food parcels and the National Voucher Scheme, until they've returned to the classroom. We can also commit now that, as we did this financial year, we will provide a programme of catch-up over the next financial year. And this will involve a further £300 million of new money to schools for tutoring. And we will work in collaboration with the education sector to develop, as appropriate, specific initiatives for summer schools and a COVID premium to support catch-up. But we recognise that these extended school closures have had a huge impact on children's learning, which will take more than a year to make up. So we will work with parents, teachers and schools to develop a long-term plan to make sure pupils have the chance to make up their learning over the course of this Parliament. I know, Mr. Speaker, that the measures I'm setting out today will be deeply frustrating to many honourable friends and colleagues and disappointing for all of us. But the way forward has been clear ever since the vaccines arrived. And as we inoculate more people hour by hour, this is the time to hold our nerve in the end game of the battle against the virus. And our goal now must be to buy the extra weeks we need to immunise the most vulnerable and get this virus under control so that together we can defeat this most wretched disease, reclaim our lives once and for all. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
I'm now going to call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, who is participating virtually. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Speaker, to lose 100,000 people to this virus is nothing short of a national tragedy. It is a stark number, an empty chair at the kitchen table, a person obviously taken before their time. And today, we should remember that. And we should mark the moment by learning the lessons of the last year to make sure that the same mistakes are not made again. Of course, any government would have struggled with this pandemic. I get that. The British people get that. But the reality is that Britain is the first country in Europe to suffer 100,000 deaths. And we have one of the highest death rates in the world. And the Prime Minister often says that he's been balancing the health restrictions against economic risks. But that simply doesn't wash, because alongside that high death toll, we also have the deepest recession of any major economy, the lowest growth of any major economy, and we're on course to have one of the slowest recoveries of any major economy. So for all the contrition and sympathy that the Prime Minister expresses, and I recognise how heartfelt that is, the truth is this was not inevitable. It wasn't just bad luck. It's the result of a huge number of mistakes by the Prime Minister during the course of this pandemic. We were too slow into lockdown last March, too slow to get protective equipment to the front line, and of course too slow to protect our care homes. Mr. Speaker, 20% of deaths in this pandemic have come from care home residents, 20%. And I really don't think that the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary understand just how offensive it was to pretend that there was a protective ring around our care homes. The government had the chance over the summer to learn from those mistakes in the first wave and prepare for a second wave and a challenging winter. I put that challenge to the Prime Minister in June, but that chance was wasted. The government then went on to fail to deliver an effective test, trace and isolate system, despite all of the warnings. They failed to deliver clear and reliable public messaging, crucial in a pandemic. 1 minute telling people to go to work, then to do the complete opposite. And the Prime Minister has failed on a number of occasions to follow the scientific advice that the virus was getting out of control. First in September, when that advice was given, and the failure to implement a circuit break or lockdown over half term as we suggested. Then in December with the fiasco over Christmas mixing. And once again, in the 13-day delay from December 22nd, when that further medical advice was given and the third national lockdown was finally introduced. As a result, we've seen a third wave more deadly than the first and second waves. Mr. Speaker, 50,000 people have died since November the 11th. 50,000 deaths in 77 days. That's a scarcely believable toll on the British people. Now, in isolation, any of these mistakes are perhaps understandable. Taken together, it's a damning indictment of how the government has handled this pandemic. The Prime Minister says, well, now is not the time to answer the question why. That's the answer he gave back in the summer after the first wave, that then was not the time to answer why. He said the same after the second wave. And he says it again now, each time repeating the mistakes over and over again. That's why now is the time to ask and answer the question why. The way out of this nightmare has now been provided by our amazing scientists, our NHS, our armed forces, and hundreds of thousands of volunteers. The vaccine programme is making incredible progress. The British people have come together to deliver what is the largest peacetime effort in our history. And despite the Prime Minister's constant complaining, all of us are doing whatever we can to help that vaccine roll out as swiftly and as safely as possible. On schools, first I have to say, even for this Prime Minister, it's quite something to open schools one day, close them the next, to call them vectors of transmission, and then to challenge me to say that the schools he's closed are safe. Only now to give a statement where he says that schools can't open until the 8th of March at the earliest because it's not safe to do so. That's his analysis. It's the sort of nonsense that's led us to the highest death toll in Europe and the worst recession. But of course we welcome any steps forward in reopening schools. And we're going to look at the detail of how the Education Secretary plans to deliver this and the plans to deliver online learning. And I also hope the Prime Minister will take seriously our proposal, echoed incidentally by the Children's Commissioner and the Conservative Chair of the Education Select Committee, that once the first 4 categories of the most vulnerable have been vaccinated by mid-February, he should bring forward the vaccination of key workers and use that window of the February half term to vaccinate all school staff, including every teacher and teaching assistant. There's a clear week there when that could be done, and it should be done. On borders, we'll look at the detail.
Order. I've got to say, I hope the right honourable gentleman's coming to the end is well past the 5 minutes that's allocated.
Mr. Speaker, on borders, Mr. Speaker, we'll look at the Prime Minister's statement in detail and obviously hear what the Home Secretary has to say. But, Mr. Speaker, in due course, there will be a public inquiry and the Prime Minister will have to answer question. But I hope that he can finally answer this very simple and direct question. Because yesterday the Prime Minister was maintaining the government had done, his words, everything we could to save lives. So is he really saying to those grieving families that their loss was just inevitable and that none of the 100,000 deaths could have been avoided? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Terrible misjudgment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the right honourable gentleman asks about mistakes, and I've said there will be a time to reflect and to analyse, to learn lessons and to prepare. But I may say to him that I believe the biggest mistake that he has made is in seeking continually to attack what the government has been trying to do at every opportunity, supporting one week and then attacking the very same policy the next week. And he complains about confusion of messages, Mr. Speaker. How much has he actually done as Leader of the Opposition to reassure the public, for instance, about NHS test and trace, which has done a very good job, I notice, of confining him for the 3rd time? What has he done to reassure people about messaging rather than attacking confusion and trying to sow doubt about what the government is doing? I think there was a very different path open to him at the beginning of this pandemic, and I think it's a great pity that he hasn't taken it. If I may say so, on schools, Mr. Speaker, he knows perfectly well that the problem is not that schools are unsafe. They are not unsafe. Schools are safe, and he should say it. And his union paymasters should hear him say it loud and clear. The problem is that, Mr. Speaker, that they bring communities together, obviously. obviously, large numbers of kids are a considerable vector of transmission. It's not that there's any particular extra risk, Mr. Speaker, to those involved in education. And I heard with interest what he had to say about his proposal for changing the JCVI priority list. And I really think that the Right Honourable Gentleman should reflect on what he is saying. Because the JCVI priority list, 1 to 9, is designed by experts, by clinicians, to prioritise, Mr. Speaker, those groups who are most likely to die or to suffer from coronavirus. And by trying to change that, and saying that he wants now to bring in other groups of public sector workers to be decided by politicians rather than by the JCVI, he has to explain which vaccines he would take from which vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, to make sense of his policy, because that is what he is doing. And that is what the Labour proposal would involve. And indeed, by making it more difficult for us to vaccinate all those vulnerable groups in the fastest possible way, Mr. Speaker, that policy, that Labour policy, would actually delay our route out of lockdown, delay our ability to get kids back into school in the way that they want. So I urge him to think again, or at least to explain which members of those vulnerable groups would be deprived of vaccines in order to follow the Labour policy. And all I can say, Mr. Speaker, having listened carefully to what the Honourable Gentleman had to say, is that everybody will have to answer questions at the end of this. And I think all politicians, let me put it this way, all politicians will be asked what they did, what we did, collaboratively, working together for the people of our country to beat this virus. And I'm not sure that upon reflection, the Right Honourable Gentleman's choice was the right one, either for his party or the country.
Let's head to Surrey, to the Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, Baroness Harding said that 40% of the people asked to self-isolate by NHS Test and Trace weren't fully doing so, which works out at a worrying 30,000 people every single day who are potentially still spreading the virus, many of them still going to work. Because this is such a big threat to our containment strategy for the virus, I wonder if the Prime Minister could say what he thinks we need to do to deal with this, and in particular, whether it is now time to consider making a blanket offer to those asked to self-isolate that we will make good any salary they lose, because in the end that may be cheaper than having to extend furlough if the case rate remains high.
Prime Minister.
I very much respect my right honourable friend's suggestion, and I understand the logic of what he is saying, but I believe that the people of this country should be isolating, self-isolating in the way that the Right Honourable General Leader of the Opposition is rightly doing, on the basis that it's the right thing for themselves, for their families and for the country. They do get support where needed of £500, and there are very considerable fines for failing to do it. And I think that is the right way forward, and I hope he will join me in commending prompt action by everybody who is asked to self-isolate. It's the right thing to do for you, for your family and for the country.
Let's head up to Scotland, to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of his statement. Mr. Speaker, as we know, yesterday the UK reached yet another terrible milestone, 100,000 COVID-related deaths. Today, it is only right that we reflect on all of those who have lost their lives during this pandemic, and our thoughts and prayers are most especially with their families, those who are left with the heaviest burden of grief. In time, there will be a reckoning on the UK government's response to this virus, and it's clear that that verdict may well be damning. In the here and now, though, it remains our job to focus on how we can support and save as many people as possible in the weeks and months ahead. That means a renewed commitment to maintaining public health, but it also must mean a renewed package of financial support for all of those Prime Minister who've been left behind by this Tory government. Right now, COVID is the immediate threat to life, but poverty remains a killer too. In 2019, the IPPR revealed that Tory austerity cuts over the previous decade had resulted in as many as 130,000 preventable deaths. The Prime Minister promised not to repeat Tory austerity. If people are to believe him, then he should start by making three important announcements today. Extend the furlough scheme for the full duration of the pandemic, maintain the uplift to universal credit and apply it to legacy benefits, and put in place a package of support for the 3 million included. Prime Minister, 11th hour announcements have got to stop. These decisions can't wait until the budget in March. People need certainty now. I asked the Prime Minister these same questions at Prime Minister's Questions, but failed to get a straight answer. So please try again, Prime Minister. Will his government extend furlough, maintain the universal credit uplift and offer support for the 3 million excluded? And finally, Mr. Speaker, on international travel. Both the Scottish and Welsh governments want to go further on quarantining measures than what his UK government is proposing. Will the Prime Minister stop his half measures and enjoin the governments in Scotland and Wales in stricter enforcements on international travel? That, Prime Minister, would be leadership.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to what the devolved administrations do later, but I can tell the House that we're putting in the toughest measures of virtually anywhere in the world, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be setting out the detail in due course. And I can tell him that this country, through the might of the UK Treasury, as my right honourable friend the Chancellor has said many times, has been able to look after people across the UK. It's thanks to the UK government that we have the furlough scheme, the bounce back loans, the many other forms of support, and it's thanks to the UK that we have, for instance, the Army able to move people in distress with COVID in remote parts of Scotland to the hospitals where they need to get to, and indeed the British Army helping across Scotland, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say, to distribute the vaccines that are so essential for our fight back from this virus. So I hope that he will abandon his nationalist position, narrow nationalist position, and look at the achievements of the UK overall. And I think it is a fine thing. It'd be a wonderful thing, by the way, if the Scottish Nationalist Party for a moment would stop talking about their desire for a referendum, Mr. Speaker, while we are trying to deal with a pandemic.
David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister is very properly concerned to protect our National Health Service, and particularly to prevent hospitals and intensive care units being overwhelmed this winter. My question is about the scope to enhance primary care to reduce the need for COVID patients to go to hospital in the first place. New Canadian studies published this week, 4,500 people, show the use of colchicine has cut hospital admissions by 25%. And death rates by almost half. Similarly, ivermectin studies, some of them have shown 75% reductions in death rates. What scope is there to act quickly to enhance our primary care level to protect populations and hospitals this winter? This winter, not next winter.
I can tell my right honourable friend he makes a very important point, and that the Therapeutics Task Force is currently reviewing both the drugs that he mentions, and I'll make sure that he is kept up to speed with their findings.
Let's head to Sir Ed Davey. Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, as of 6:30 p.m. yesterday, the UK has the worst recorded death rate by head of population in the world. This is a grave moment for our country. I'm sure all our hearts go out to the families who have lost loved ones. Last week, the Prime Minister told me he was still not prepared to launch the inquiry into the COVID crisis that he promised 6 months ago. So instead today, will he at least tell the country that he will launch this inquiry sometime this year, so we can find out why our country has seen the worst death rates from COVID in the world, learn the lessons, and give bereaved families the answers and the justice he owes them?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, once again, the right honourable gentleman has the answer contained in his question, because this country is going through a very grievous bout of a deadly pandemic. He rightly draws attention to the death toll of 100,000, and as he knows, there are currently 37,000 people in hospital, and the entire British state is working flat out to bring that virus under control and to get us through this pandemic and out the other side. And now, as I've told him before, not the right time to consecrate the energies and efforts of officialdom. It would be huge to an inquiry, though, as I have said before, I said last night, and I'll reassure him again today, yes, of course, there will be a time to learn lessons, to reflect and to understand and to prepare, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Now we go to Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome and thank my right honourable friend for his upbeat statement, which offers much-needed hope to a beleaguered nation, rather contrary to Captain Hindsight's contribution. With a successful inoculation programme in full swing, his plan to break free from lockdowns and restrictions is critical. Variants or no variants, does my right honourable friend agree that the lives and livelihoods of millions of our citizens now depend on a more proportionate response to this pandemic, which will require political courage to initiate?
Mr. Speaker, I very much respect the point of view of my honourable friend, who has long been a keen and justified campaigner for liberty, and I share his instincts very strongly. But I must tell him that we will continue to be cautious in our approach, because we do not wish to see more lives lost than we can possibly avoid, Mr. Speaker. And so that's why what we will do is continue with the rollout of the vaccine programme, the fastest in Europe, and currently, and on February the 15th, as I just said to the House, we will look at where we are, and we will be setting out a roadmap, which I hope will be useful to him and to all colleagues throughout the House on February the 22nd.
And now we go to Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Prime Minister. Would the Prime Minister confirm what discussions has taken place with his counterparts in education to give ample time for teachers to either plan their online teaching with special reference to children who cannot or will not be able to access their online classes? I agree with the Prime Minister. I think it's better that the children are back in their classrooms. But can the Prime Minister ensure that all the teaching staff, especially the special needs teachers, will be a priority for the vaccine rollout? And can he also confirm that there will be no shortage of vaccine, as was indicated on the press today? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me. We're rolling out 1.3 million laptops. We're making sure that pupils have access to online learning wherever possible. But the most important thing is, as the right honourable gentleman has rightly said, is get kids back in school as soon as we sensibly can. That's what this government is determined to do. I want to reassure him about the vaccination programme. He mentioned anxieties about supply. As I stand before you today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am confident that we'll deliver on the February the 15th pledge, and that we'll continue to be able to drive up. I see my honourable friend, who the Minister for the vaccine rollout, confirming that we will be able to continue that accelerating curve of supply as well.
Christian Wakefoot.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join with members from across the House in sending my deepest of condolences to each and every one of the individuals who's tragically passed away as a result of COVID. However, during this extremely difficult time, I have nothing but admiration for the army of volunteers working tirelessly in my constituency and across the country. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking organisations like the Fed, Jewish Volunteering Network, Heads Up and Porch Boxers, along with all those who've done so much to protect the vulnerable and the needy in Prestwich, Radcliffe and Whitefield.
Mr. Speaker, I will indeed join my honourable friend in paying tribute to those volunteers in his constituency. They join a huge constellation of shining points of light across our country. It's been one of the most extraordinary things, one of the consolations, one of the few consolations of this crisis has been the upsurge, Madam Deputy Speaker, there has been in volunteering.
Now we go to Debbie Abrams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also associate my remarks with others and express my sincerest condolences to everyone who's lost a loved one, and particularly the constituents who I spoke with last night. Madam Deputy Speaker, Professor Sir Michael Marmot's recent report pointed to 4 drivers which have contributed to the high and unequal death toll in the UK. He identified the governance and political culture which has damaged social cohesion and inclusivity, the widening inequalities in power, money and resources, the regressive austerity policies over the last 10 years, and the declining life expectancy and healthy life expectancy of the poorest, particularly women, which is amongst the worst of all comparable economies. Professor Marmot has called for the government to address these issues and to build back fairer. So will the Prime Minister and his cabinet listen to him?
I have a very high regard, Madam Deputy Speaker, for Michael Marmot and worked closely with him for many years, and I believe his advice is invaluable, and we will indeed be making sure that as we come through this pandemic, we look at the way it has impacted on the poorest and the most vulnerable, and indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will build back fairer.
And now we go to James Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The vaccine rollout now offers hope and relief to vulnerable people who have spent months living in fear and in isolation. To hear that 6.8 million vaccines have now been delivered is an amazing achievement, and I thank everyone involved in this rollout. The mass vaccination hubs are an important part of the scheme, but many of my constituents with mobility issues are worried they're going to miss out on their vaccine because they can't make the journey to one of these larger hubs. Could the Prime Minister give them reassurance that they will be offered a vaccine locally or even in their own homes, and anyone unable to travel will be fully supported?
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, and I hope she will give this reassurance to her constituents that they need have no anxieties about that. They don't have to go to the vaccination centres. They can either go to their GP surgeries or indeed they will be visited in their own home.
Now we go to Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I add my condolences to those already expressed to the victims, their families and friends of this awful illness. One of the challenges children and adults working from home, the time now for children extended today by the Prime Minister, in addition to devices and connectivity, is the lack of digital skills. This week, I was made aware of an online scam asking people to put their financial information into a very plausible fake NHS website in order to get the vaccine. What is the Prime Minister doing to tackle this criminal activity, preying on often vulnerable people waiting for the vaccine? And also, what is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that individuals, young and old, have the digital skills they need to protect themselves, learn from home and work from home?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right about the importance of digital skills and of connectivity, and that's why we're massively increasing, for instance, gigabit broadband across the country, superfast broadband, and making sure that people have the technology that they need. She raises a particularly important point about online scams, and these are a problem. And I can tell her that we're working across government to beat these fraudsters, to root them out, led by the Cabinet Office. And if she'll be kind enough to send me details of the case that she mentions, we will feed it into our system immediately.
And now we go to Greg Clark.
Hi.
Do we have the sound working for Mr. Clark?
What's going on? Hello, Greg.
Apologise to the honourable member that the system, we appear to be hearing the sound engineers. Perhaps we will leave that for a moment. We'll come back to the honourable member for Tunbridge Wells, and meanwhile we'll go to York, hopefully to Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The evidence shows that the government's approach to easing the lockdown before Christmas meant that crowds of people came to York, despite my warnings, spreading the infection in the retail, hospitality and transport sectors because they could travel to a lower tier and were off guard in my community. The result has been devastating. It was completely unsafe and completely avoidable. Will the Prime Minister commit not to return to a tiered system where people can freely move the infection from one place to another? What steps will he take to avoid this catastrophe from happening again? And can I meet with one of his ministers to discuss York's tragic experience over Christmas?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as soon as we were informed of the extra transmissibility, 50 to 70% faster of the new variant, we took all the action that we could. And I would just remind the honourable lady that the best thing we can do for the people of York now is to make sure that we keep this virus under control and with the measures that we are, the tough measures that we have, and that we all come forward for the vaccine. I would urge her to get her constituents to come forward and take that vaccine. They're going great guns in Yorkshire. I think my memory is in Yorkshire, I think they're taking more vaccine than virtually anywhere else in the country. And I congratulate the people of Yorkshire on what they're doing. But we're now coming into the last furlong of the JCVI 1 to 4, and it would be great to get 100% of the people of Yorkshire in the course of the next few days.
Now we go to my esteemed constituency neighbour, Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In all the gloom of the tragedy of COVID, will my Right Honourable Friend pay tribute to the staff and volunteers working so hard to scale up the programme of vaccinations in Harlow and delivering the life-saving vaccine to thousands of residents in our new mass vaccination centre? I know he wants schools and colleges to open sooner rather than later, and I really welcome what he has said today about catch up, the extra funding, free school meals, and above all, the education plan for a COVID recovery. Will he ensure the catch up fund also helps children with mental health problems? And will he work with a coalition of the willing, such as the Children Commissioner and other educationalists, to get all our children back in the classroom?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I join my right honourable friend in congratulating the volunteers, not just the NHS, the Army and the pharmacies, but the volunteers who are making the vaccine rollout possible. And yes, I can tell my right honourable friend that we are putting extra funding into mental health problems, particularly for children and young people, and the funding that we've announced every year of more than 2 billion extra, 3 billion extra, Mr. Speaker, I think will go to help 345,000 children as well.
Thank you. And now we go to Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. ONS data shows that key workers and those in manual and public-facing jobs are at the highest risk of dying from coronavirus. Bradford is a key worker city, and tragically, over 1,000 Bradfordians have now died from the virus. When the most vulnerable groups have been vaccinated, will the Prime Minister ensure that priority is then given to frontline workers who have played such a key role in keeping the country going during the pandemic, often with a high risk to their personal safety, including police officers, teachers, shop workers, bus and taxi drivers, and many others who are just unable to work from home? So when will he publish his plan for the next stage of the vaccine rollout?
Can I just congratulate the honourable lady for being so much more sensible than her party leader, who was saying that he wants to interrupt the vaccine rollout for the vulnerable groups, Madam Deputy Speaker, and decide politically to who should get the vaccine. I think we should leave it to the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation for the JCVI to do to decide the most vulnerable groups. That's what we're going to do. That's the fastest way to deal with those who are most likely to die. I see she's shaking her head. She perhaps disagrees with the suggestion that she's just made, but I think that it's an excellent suggestion and she should stick to it.
Now we go to Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to reopen schools as soon as possible. And may I also thank him for the vaccine rollout. But what I'm asking today on behalf of children everywhere, as a mother of a 9-year-old, I can see that children, young children, are struggling. And their cognitive development is determined at this age. We are storing up a lifetime of problems of anxiety, mental health, obesity by having all of our young primary age children at home. And please, may I urge the Prime Minister to have courage in these final months to bring children, particularly primary age children, back to school as quickly as possible.
My honourable friend is completely right, and I know that she speaks for millions of mothers and millions of parents across the country who want our kids to be back in school and who are anxious about the gaps in their learning that may be arising as a result of this pandemic. We're going to do everything we can to plug those gaps. She's heard what I've said about catch-up funds, about the investments that we're making in tuition, in one-to-one tutorials, but it will go on not just this year, but next year and throughout this Parliament until we've made up the ground for those kids, because they deserve it. And we will, of course, work as fast as possible to get schools open, but we must do it in a way that is cautious and proportionate.
Now we go to Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many people on low incomes and in precarious work still cannot afford to self-isolate on the UK's meagre level of statutory sick pay, and some aren't even entitled to that. So can I ask the Prime Minister, what impact does he feel the UK having one of the lowest rates of statutory sick pay has had in the death rate, and will he increase it now as a matter of urgency to help people do the right thing and stay safe?
Madam Deputy Speaker, in addition to statutory sick pay and universal credit, there is, of course, also the £500 that we make available to those in need of it, and that is the right way forward. I'm afraid she's not right in what she says about the levels of statutory sick pay in this country. They compare favourably with countries around the world.
And now we go to Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government ordered the COVID vaccine early. They have delivered it efficiently, and we now have 11% of the population vaccinated. Compare that with the European Union, where because of their bureaucracy, inefficiency and petty politics, they ordered the vaccine late, they delivered it inefficiently, and have only vaccinated 2% of their population. Prime Minister, it is not just a great credit to your leadership and your government that we have delivered the vaccination so quickly, but also, is it not one of the great advantages of having left the European Union?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, what I will say is that we certainly were able to use speed and agility to deliver on the programme that we needed to do. And I think it would have been a great pity, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we'd followed the advice of the leader of the opposition and the Labour Party, who said stay in the EU vaccines programme, who wanted to get rid of big pharmaceutical companies in the crazed Corbynite agenda on which the Leader of the Opposition stood at the last election, and who attacked the vaccine task force that secured 367 million doses of vaccine. So, Mr. Speaker, I do think that we've been able to do things differently and better, but in some ways, but it is early days, and it is very, very important to remember that this is an international venture, these vaccines. We depend on our friends and partners, and we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to work with those friends and partners in the EU and beyond.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt the honourable member for Wellingborough while he was in full virtual rhetorical flow, but he knows that he mustn't address the Prime Minister as you, and he mustn't say, "What are you doing, Prime Minister?" He must address the Chair, and he's setting a bad example as a senior member of this House, as are many senior members of this House, to new members who have yet to learn the proper mode of address. We must be careful during this time of virtual proceedings not to let standards fall. We now go to Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I support the vaccination programme. My clinical commissioning groups have been amongst the best in England at rolling out the COVID vaccine, a real success story for the communities I represent, who've been placed under restrictions since the 29th of July. But today the NHS has said it will cut by 1/3 the future vaccine supplies to the North West so the rest can catch up. That's worrying if true. So can I ask the Prime Minister about logistics? What impact does he think withholding vaccines to the North West will have? Will second jabs be delayed still further, or will the next cohort of first jabs need to be rescheduled, leaving those people unprotected for longer?
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm to the honourable gentleman that I will make sure that his constituents get exactly what they need for the rollout to the 1 to 4 groups. I'm assured by my honourable friend, the Minister for Vaccines, there is no such delay, and I'm delighted that he now supports the vaccination. Perhaps he could repudiate the policy on which he stood to destroy the pharmaceutical companies that have made them possible, and perhaps he could dissociate himself from previous Labour attacks on the vaccine task force that secured the doses on which he now relies.
And we now go to Laura Trott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the emphasis today on school return. It is absolutely vital. We know the devastating impact that being out of school has on children's mental health. The Prime Minister is absolutely right. Schools are safe to return. There is now firm evidence that particularly primary schools do not contribute to the spread of this vicious disease. Will the Prime Minister commit to sharing this evidence with teachers, parents and students so they can be reassured that regardless of vaccine, schools are safe to return?
The Honourable Lady is spot on. Schools are safe, and the only issue with opening schools, as I said to the House earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, is of course that you add to the overall budget of transmission by opening them, because you bring lots of households together. Obviously, that's what a school does. But schools are safe. They're wonderful places, and I support my honourable friend in wanting to get them open as soon as possible.
Now we go to Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have self-employed constituents who are coming up to a year without support. Businesses in supply chains unable to furlough staff, newly established businesses and others who fall foul of administrative deadlines, as obviously do other members. Now, I welcome the support that has been provided, but will the Prime Minister agree to consider those who have fallen through the gaps? And in answering, can I ask him not to repeat the list of what has been done, but to say what he will do now to support those excluded, including considering the cross-party proposal for a targeted income grant scheme?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he makes an excellent point, one that's been made many times across this House, and we will of course do everything we can to assist those who are hard to identify and who don't, for HMRC purposes, are not easy to, whose incomes and whose entitlements are not easy, therefore, to calculate. The group is in fact far smaller than you sometimes hear in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the cases can be very complex, but we remain committed to doing everything we can to help people throughout the pandemic.
And now we go to Sir David Amess.
I join with my right honourable friend in celebrating the success of our vaccination programme, which is working well in Southend. I also welcome my right honourable friend's remarks about education. However, would he join me in reminding people that if they accept an invitation to be vaccinated, they should keep that appointment, and we should all help elderly people to do that. Otherwise, vaccinators will have to make the very difficult decision at short notice what to do with those spare vaccines.
Absolutely. My right honourable friend makes a very important point. We must get people to take up their appointments, to take up the vaccines when they are offered. There are some groups who are proving tough to reach, and I look forward to all members across the House working together to encourage people in a positive way of the advantages of a vaccine. It's a wonderful thing. Go and get it if you get a message to do so.
And now we go to Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Health life expectancy for men at birth in the first ward of my constituency of Wansbeck is 52 years of age, whilst in Aikenham, in the Prime Minister's constituency, it's 71 years of age, and that trend looks to get only wider. Can the Prime Minister explain to the people of my constituency why his government is so eager to avoid a vaccine postcode lottery by diverting our supply from the northeast southwards to more prosperous regions in the country, simply because the NHS in our area have done an absolutely fantastic job, whilst at the same time the government has done nothing to tackle the postcode lottery of healthy life expectancy. That varies so widely across this country. And can I urge the Prime Minister to consider whether the same actions would have been taken if the shoe had been on the other foot?
Before I ask the Prime Minister to answer the question, I must beg for questions from members. I know that people are sitting at home and the opportunity to make a speech makes them want to speak for longer once they actually have the attention of the House. But please, we will never get on to the next statement or let the Prime Minister go to complete all the promises he's made today if we don't get this statement finished. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman and I share an ambition. We want to unite and level up, and across the whole of the UK, that's the mission of this government. That's why I'm afraid he's totally wrong in what he says about the rollout of the vaccines. We're making sure that everywhere gets what they need for the JCVI groups 1 to 4 by February the 15th. That is what we are doing and will continue to do. But I'm delighted, by the way, by his conversion to the vaccines. I seem to have read somewhere that he seemed a bit sceptical, Madam Deputy Speaker, about there he goes, smirking away. It's not a smirking matter. It's absolutely crucial. Tell your constituents, he should tell his constituents, Madam Deputy Speaker, to get a vaccination.
Sir Desmond Swain.
To lift lockdown, will he focus exclusively on the progress of vaccinations of those who are most likely to be hospitalised if infected? Mission creep beyond hospitalisations will inevitably lead to the diminution of our sense of urgency to lift the restrictions, wouldn't it?
My honourable friend is completely right, and he gets to the heart of the problem in the policy that's been announced, the pretend policy that's been announced by the party opposite. Because if you were, Madam Deputy Speaker, to interfere with the JCVI 1 to 9 list, which is intended to target those most vulnerable, those most at risk of dying or of hospitalisation, you would, of course, and interpolate it with other people appointed by politicians, you would, of course, take vaccines away from the more vulnerable groups, and, as the Honourable Gentleman rightly says, you would delay our ability to move forward out of lockdown. He is spot on.
And now we go to Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like many places, in Luton, we are challenged to reduce cases of COVID as a large number of people work in jobs where it's not possible to work from home. What is the government doing to support businesses to reduce workplace transmission? Will those plans include decent sick pay and rolling out of home rapid test kits to small and medium-sized employers to support reducing this risk?
She makes an excellent point about the need to roll out rapid test kits, and that is happening in communities and towns, cities across the country, and I commend her for supporting them. They may not be the total answer, of course not, to fighting this disease, but they're extremely useful in isolating asymptomatic cases and helping us to drive down the R rate in local communities.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I ask my good and honourable friend, the Prime Minister, if priority lists for vaccinations will be reviewed after tiers 1 to 4 are complete, particularly for groups that we're having emails from, such as police officers, supermarket cashiers, teachers, home carers, and people with learning disabilities, some of whom seem to be disproportionately afflicted by COVID-19. Thank you. Yes.
Of course he's right to raise that, and I thank my honourable friend, but I just repeat what I said earlier to the Right Honourable Gentleman Leader of the Opposition. It follows from everything that I've said that teachers in the vulnerable groups, in that list of groups 1 to 9, police officers in those groups, supermarket workers, cashiers in those groups, people with learning disabilities, they are our priority, Madam Deputy Speaker, and they are our priority because it's by vaccinating them that we'll be able to reduce I'm afraid, the tragic death toll that we would otherwise see.
Now we go to Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Staff at Hull Royal Infirmary and Castle Hill have been magnificent during this pandemic, but they are used to making people better, and the death toll on staff is taking its toll, and they are physically exhausted. So I wanted to know what the Prime Minister is planning to do to support exhausted staff in dealing with the ever-growing waiting list which they will face once the COVID threats has subsided.
I thank her very much. I think it was Simon Stevens, the Chief Executive of NHS England, who put it best yesterday when he said that the best thing we could do for our NHS staff, and she's absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker, in what she says about the stress that the NHS has been operating under these last few weeks, the pressure that they're under. The best thing we can do now is to keep this infection rate going down, to roll out the vaccination, and indeed to make sure that all NHS staff are vaccinated, which, as she knows, they are in the JCVI 1 to 4 group. They are our priority for February the 15th.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The rollout of the vaccine has been a truly heroic effort by absolutely everybody involved, not least to remain on track to get the top 4 priority groups their first dose by the middle of February. Every vaccine brings hope, but there is also an incredible amount of anxiety in the country, not least by business owners unable to trade, families juggling home learning, withholding down jobs. So can I urge my right honourable friend, as he looks at rightly lifting the restrictions, to be really clear with all of our constituents precisely what when the data permits means, so that there can be absolute clarity as to what needs to happen to lift each tier of the restrictions?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I will, of course, be setting all this out in the course of the next few weeks. But what I can tell the House is that some obvious things that the House can see for itself. We need to be sure that the vaccine rollout continues to go at the pace with the success that it currently is. We need to make sure that we're targeting all those groups, reducing the overall level of vulnerability in the population. We need to make sure clearly that the vaccine is working, or the vaccines are working, because there are at least 2 now, in the sense that they're driving down the mortality rate of those elderly and vulnerable groups. We need to start to see that, Madam Deputy Speaker. The promising signs from Israel, we haven't yet seen in this country the data that would help us to be absolutely confident of that point. Then, of course, the pressures on the NHS and other important considerations, to say nothing of the very important economic considerations that he also raises. But I can assure him that there will be much more that we'll be setting out in the course of the next weeks to give reassurance and certainty as far as we can to all our constituents.
Now we go to Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When Australia had a second wave, they held an inquiry. It showed the failures of the private contractors in the system of quarantine that they were running. They learnt from it. The minister resigned, and they are better, and now they are almost COVID-free. The Prime Minister is so right in saying that, of course, every government will make mistakes. But why won't the Prime Minister open an inquiry now so we can learn those mistakes and we don't keep repeating them, like delays in lockdown and delays in school opening, and actually start to turn this thing around? Will he commit here and now to do a short, sharp public inquiry, as my committee suggested, and so that we can all be the better for it?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, indeed to the work of his committee, and I know that those conclusions, along with many others, will be studied with care. But I know you want brief answers, Madam Deputy, so I really will direct him to the answers I've already given to his right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, on that point, and many others throughout the day. Of course, we will learn the lessons, but at the height of the pandemic, we would have to concentrate a huge amount of official and health sector time to an inquiry when we need to get on with beating the virus.
Now we go to Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the rollout of the vaccine has been an undoubted success for the government, but it brings us to a point where people now want to understand the path ahead to give them something to aim towards. I welcome the clarity Prime Minister's given today on schools, but in the coming days, can you also give a clear route map which sets out the potential for further easing of restrictions, such as when outdoor exercise facilities such as golf courses can resume, hospitality events can restart, now high streets can reopen, to reassure people that there is light at the end of the tunnel and they will shortly realise some of the benefits for the incredible sacrifices they've had to make over recent months.
My honourable friend is entirely right in what he asks for, and I will be supplying, I hope, exactly that. He will recall last year how we set out, Madam Deputy Speaker, a series of dates by which, at the earliest, we hoped to do certain things. He will recall July the 4th, I think, for opening hospitality and so on and so forth. I hope that in the course of the next few weeks we will be able to populate the diary ahead with some more milestones, some more assumptions about what we may be able to do that I hope will give reassurance to him, to businesses in his constituency, and to all of us.
And now we go to Marian Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The First Minister of Scotland has today reinforced her message, telling people not to travel when it's not really, really, really essential. And with new border restrictions, it's likely we'll see a reduction in the amount of travel into the UK, which will harm aviation and travel firms. Is sector-specific support coming in light of these new policies, Prime Minister?
Well, Madam Deputy, of course we've supported the aviation sector through the time to pay scheme and others, and we've just been introducing particular support for airfields, runways that are not in as much use as they could be. But the best way, as she knows, to get that sector and all others bouncing back is to continue on the path that we're on, drive the virus down, vaccinate the population and open up sensibly.
And now we go to Ian Menz.
Very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I should declare an interest as I am a chair of the school governors and trustee of a joint schools board. In my youth, I was a scout and our motto was be prepared. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to congratulate school leaders and their staff for keeping schools open for vulnerable children and children of key workers where possible during the lockdown. So could the Prime Minister get his right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, to share his plan, because he tells us he has a plan for the full reopening of schools with school leaders as soon as possible so that they can be prepared to put into place the necessary measures to reopen schools fully and in such a way that plans have the confidence of parents, children and the school staff that their schools will be ready and truly safe for everyone.
I join the honourable gentleman very much in congratulating schools on what they've done to make their schools COVID secure, the incredible amount of work they're doing to educate. I think 14% of kids are in school now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say nothing of all the home learning that is going on, thanks to the efforts of teachers as well. So thank you to our schools. And I've set out a little bit today. I think you'd agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, about what we plan to do to get schools back, the extra support that we're giving, the timetable. But of course, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, as the gentleman suggests, will be saying more in due course.
And now we go to Rob Butler.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pubs, the restaurants, the hairdressers, the gyms and the many excellent shops of Aylesbury are desperate to reopen. Can my right honourable friend reassure them that the measures he has announced today, combined with the vaccination rollout, will speed up when that will happen and that there is a route out of lockdown for us all?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think I could agree more vehemently with my honourable friend if I tried. I don't think I have nothing to add to his excellent question. Yes, of course, that is the way ahead.
And now we go to Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister proud that he spent £500 million of public money on the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which it is now estimated increased the spread of the virus by up to 17%?
I wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether the Right Honourable Lady is proud of attacking the Vaccine Task Force for spending £675,000 on whether vaccines would reach the most vulnerable people in our society.
And now we go to Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking the British military personnel who have performed an incredible service in helping to roll out the vaccine at pace across every part of the UK, including the 92 personnel helping in Wales? And does he agree that their service shows how the UK is stronger when all four of our nations work together in the fight against this pandemic?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's been one of the, as I say, one of the few consolations of this pandemic to see the way the country has come together to fight it, and in particular to see the way great national institutions, great UK institutions such as the Army, British Army, have been absolutely indispensable in Wales, in Scotland, around the whole of the UK in fighting this pandemic. And I know that it's appreciated across the whole of the UK.
Now we go to Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Greater Manchester, there are 20,000 pupils out of schools and with no decent access to online learning. Can the Prime Minister assure me that the £300 million that he's just announced in catch-up and tutoring money will be targeted at areas like Greater Manchester, where pupils have suffered disproportionately because of deprivation and because of high rates of infections that caused multiple periods of isolation, keeping them off school?
Yes, indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, he's right to raise the problem of differential learning. Some kids, unquestionably, in some parts of the country, some families have suffered more of a break in their education than others. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and that's why we're going to focus so much on the catch-up funds that I've identified. Of course, Greater Manchester will be targeted for all the measures that we've outlined this morning, and more to come.
And now we go to Dean Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Across Watford, we've got incredible teachers, and I would like to ask the right honourable gentleman, the Prime Minister, if he would agree with me to thank them for the incredible work they've been doing keeping schools open for key workers' children, and also confirm his priority to make sure that schools can reopen as soon as it is safe to do so, in line with our advice from our scientific and medical advisors. Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend and I have visited wonderful schools in his constituency together. We know the fantastic job that they're doing, and I know from talking to those teachers and those pupils how much they will be looking forward now to getting back into to school. I can tell my honourable friend we will do everything we can to speed it up, but we must be cautious. We must make sure that we do it in tandem, pari passu, with the rollout of the vaccine.
And now we go to Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister has talked about the important support from the British Army in the vaccination rollout. And Salford's programme has been supported by troops from the Royal Lancers. We do appreciate that, but we've been told that this military support is being withdrawn next Monday, giving less than a week to recruit and train 30 people. And that would mean Salford will be able to deliver 500 fewer vaccines a day. Delays to vaccinations cost lives, so will the Prime Minister ensure that this vital military support isn't withdrawn from Salford?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very doubtful that the people of Salford would be deprived in the way that she describes, but I will, of course, look into it urgently, and my honourable friend, the Minister for Vaccines, will be taking it up immediately.
And finally, Steve Brine.
Thank you. Many parents will have faced homeschooling last year with a sense of necessary resignation. My sense is that many are actually now quite desperately worried about their children. So it's just fantastic news that the Prime Minister has said today that as the vaccines roll out, the most vulnerable are protected, that will move in lockstep and we'll get the country back to school. But can I ask him whether the 8th of March date has to wait for all schools, even primary, given we all agree, and he has said today at the dispatch box, that schools are safe?
I hear my honourable friend loud and clear, and I know his views will be shared by many in this House. I just want to go back to that key thing that we need to establish, and it won't, alas, be until the middle of February that we have real material evidence that the vaccines are working in terms of driving down the mortality rate amongst those crucial groups. And so, if you were to give schools decent notice to come back, you're driven more towards the 8th of March by that logic, rather than coming back early. I appreciate we've been round and round. Believe me, we've been round and round it many times, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is about as fast as we think we can prudently go, and I think that is what the country would want. They would want schools open, but they would want them open in a cautious and sensible way.
Thank you. I will now...
The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has been making a statement to the House of Commons this lunchtime. Two significant announcements from him. The first concerning schools. It will not be possible to open schools immediately after the February half-term holiday. The hope is to begin the reopening of schools from Monday, the 8th of March, he said, provided that the vaccination programme goes as planned and that hospitalisations begin to fall. A plan for taking the country out of lockdown will be published by the Prime Minister, by the government, the week beginning the 22nd of February, and that will set out more detail on the approach for reopening of schools. And on the subject of quarantine, all arrivals from high-risk countries will be required to isolate in government-provided accommodation for 10 days without exception. We're going to get more details on that from the Home Secretary Priti Patel shortly. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Westminster and was listening in to that statement from the Prime Minister. He's been under a lot of pressure, John, to set out a roadmap for how we come out of this period of lockdown. We got a little bit, but not a lot.
What we've learned is that pubs, restaurants, non-essential retail, all of that's staying in England is staying shut until probably sometime after the 8th of March, because yes, the Prime Minister has announced that date of the 8th of March for the first schools reopening, but it sounded very much like a target. And what he didn't say, of course, was that all those other things are going to stay shut because he said, he used a phrase he's used before, schools being a national priority, reopening them a national priority. And it could be, I mean, over the weekend we heard Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, say on Sophie Ridge on Sunday, he hoped that schools would reopen at Easter. Well, March the 8th, you're not that many weeks from Easter then, and it could well be Easter before the schools open. And given that they're opening first, well, that means everything else is staying shut. Now, Tory MPs, of course, are on his case. The COVID recovery group led by Mark Harper. We heard from Sir Desmond Swain during the exchanges talking about mission creep. The Prime Minister clearly wanted to tell his backbenchers, look, as soon as we get back here after half-term, we'll publish our proposals, but I can tell you our aim is to get some schools back on the 8th of March. Now, he was very dismissive, both at PMQs and during that statement, of the calls from Sir Keir Starmer to test key workers like teachers and police officers. Mr Johnson's argument is that keeps to vaccinate key workers, that keeps vaccinations away from vulnerable people, older people who the government believes need them more based on the advice from the government scientists. However, what Mr Johnson's saying about that slightly contradicts what Mr Hancock also said on Sophie Ridge on Sunday, that police officers could be in with a shout, he said. And yesterday at the combined hearing of the Health Committee and I'm going to stop now because here's Priti Patel.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Make a statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to begin my remarks by echoing the words of the Prime Minister. The scale of the suffering this virus has inflicted is truly heartbreaking, and my thoughts are with those who have tragically lost loved ones. Yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, when I addressed the House, I said the government's focus is on protecting the UK's world-leading vaccination programme, a programme that we should be proud of, and reducing the risk of a new strain of the virus being transmitted from someone coming into the UK. Yesterday, the Foreign Office announced support for more countries to access the UK's world-leading gene sequencing capacities and capabilities to increase early identification of any new strains of the virus. This is a vital step forward to support the global response to coronavirus, but it is simply not enough on its own to reduce risks to the United Kingdom. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is clear that there are still too many people coming in and out of our country each day. And today I am announcing further action to strengthen the health measures that we already have at the border, but to reduce passenger flow, so that only a small number of people for whom it is absolutely essential to travel are doing so, and therefore reducing the risk to our world-leading vaccine programme. So for those entering the UK, there will be a number of measures. Firstly, the police have stepped up checks and are carrying out more physical checks at addresses to ensure that people are complying with the self-isolation rules. Second, we will continue to refuse entry to non-UK residents from red list countries which are already subject to the UK travel ban. Third, as the Prime Minister has said, we will introduce a new managed isolation process in hotels for those who cannot be refused entry, including those arriving home from countries where we have already imposed international travel bans. They will be required to isolate for 10 days without exception. And the Department of Health and Social Care will set out further details on this approach next week. And for those travelling out of the UK, we will also be enhancing and stepping up enforcement rules. Because despite the stay-at-home regulations, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are still seeing people not complying with these rules. The rules are clear. People should be staying at home unless they have a valid reason to leave. Going on holiday is not a valid reason. So we will introduce a new requirement so that people wishing to travel must first make a declaration as to why they need to travel. This reason for travel will be checked by carriers prior to departure. And this approach, Madam Deputy Speaker, effectively mirrors the checks on arrivals that are already in place with the passenger locator form. Secondly, working with policing partners, we will increase police presence at ports and at airports, finding those in breach of the stay-at-home regulations. Anyone who does not have a valid reason for travel will be directed to return home, or they will face a fine. Third, we will urgently review the list of travel exemptions made to make sure that only the most important and with exceptional reasons are included. These are crucial new measures to protect us all, but also to complement the robust action we have consistently taken at the border. And while these new measures are being operationalised, I would just like to remind anyone seeking to enter our country to comply with the rules. This includes providing evidence of a negative COVID test before entering the United Kingdom, self-isolation on arrival for 10 days, and the completion of the passenger locator form. Immediately stepping up enforcement means that if you do not follow the regulations, you will face a fine. Madam Deputy Speaker, these new measures at the border are a necessary step to protect the public and our world-class vaccination programme. Every layer of protection we have put in place will help to reduce the risk of transmission of this virus and any new potential strain from entering the UK. And as we have done, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout this global health emergency, we will continue to take all steps necessary to protect the public and help prevent the spread of this virus. I commend the statement to the House.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. We stand here today in knowledge of the terrible fact that over 100,000 people have died as a result of this awful virus. We mourn all of those lost and think of those families for whom life will never be the same again. And in marking this, it is not enough to say, let us wait to find out why Britain has fared so badly. We must learn from past mistakes and, crucially, act now. And one of the key areas where the government has clearly fallen short is on protecting our borders. And I'm deeply concerned that the measures outlined today are yet another example of this. Too little, too late. Yet again, the government is lurching from one crisis to another, devoid of strategy. And limiting hotel quarantining to only a limited number of countries, from which travel from non-UK residents was already banned, means that the Home Secretary's proposals do not go anywhere near far enough. And perhaps that's why it appears there has been briefing to newspapers that the Home Secretary is personally not in support of the policy she's now advocating to the public. Mutations of the virus risk undermining the efficacy of the vaccines, threatening life and hope. We cannot know where these mutations will emerge from next. And the truth is the government is once again behind the curve. Labour is calling for a comprehensive hotel quarantining. Today's announcement is too limited. It leaves huge gaps in our defences against emerging strains. We know that the strains that emerged in South Africa and Brazil have already reached these shores. Little wonder, really, when controls have been so lax. With just 3 in every 100 people quarantining successfully contacted, and border testing only introduced 10 months after our first lockdown. And even then, the start had to be delayed because the government couldn't get the necessary systems in place. We've seen this reluctance to be decisive from the start of the crisis. From the 1st of January to the 23rd of March last year, only 273 people were formally quarantined when over 18 million people entered the country by air. And this at a time, by the way, when the government's own chief scientific advisor said, and I quote, "A lot of the cases in the UK didn't come from China, they came from European imports and the high level of travel into the UK at the time." In April, I wrote to the Home Secretary to ask her to learn the lessons, but by May still, the UK was an international outlier with no travel controls. Now, as the Home Secretary today belatedly announces very limited hotel quarantining, many questions remain which I would appreciate if she could address. Firstly, how can we be assured that travellers will not arrive with emergent strains via countries that are not on the control list? Second, what support is being made available to ensure improvements to quarantine compliance and the isolation assurance service? And frankly, why has it taken so long to step up checks, as the Home Secretary said today, when we know the system's been failing for months? What discussions have taken place with hotel chains to ensure the availability of rooms? And for those travelling out of the United Kingdom, again, why is the enforcement only being stepped up now? And will the Home Secretary ensure that sufficient support and sufficient resources are made available for these very important tasks? And when, Madam Deputy Speaker, will the government announce a sector-specific support package for aviation? Getting this policy right is absolutely crucial. The government cannot allow our border policy to continue to be the Achilles heel of the heroic efforts of the British people during this pandemic.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think there are a number of comments that I would just like to make before I come to the honourable gentleman's questions. First of all, I think it's fair to say that compared to this time last year, and I was here yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, reeling off the endless measures at the border that have been put in place since January last year, including Foreign Office advice, statutory instruments, regulations and powers under the Coronavirus Act, and then, of course, quarantine, passenger locator forms and test and release, as well as banning flights and travel from specific countries. I think it's important to recognise that because of the incredible work that we have in this country with regards to the vaccine, our world-leading vaccine programme, we're in a very different situation now last year because of the additional risk to public health caused by new variants. And it's this new variant, obviously, that we should be focused on, because obviously that could be less susceptible, it could have implications for the vaccine. So it is important that we reduce risk by reducing the number of people who enter our country and could be a new threat, obviously, in terms of the variants and mutations. We've already implemented numerous measures and protections to reduce that risk. But these are a number of new additional levels of protection at our disposal that are being announced today, but also forthcoming with regards to hotels. And I'm going to come on to the specifics in a minute. The honourable gentleman has also made the point about travel. Now, the fact of the matter is there are reductions in travel already. The number of people that are travelling has reduced by 90%, obviously, compared to this time last year. But obviously that number will become lower through various travel bans that have been put in place. He's touched on enforcement measures and the IAS service and also police enforcement. There are a number of new measures, or enhanced measures, I should say, that will increase the checks that will take place. So IS service, for example, from tomorrow will be checking over 5,000 people. IS will also contact those who arrive in the way in which they have been 10 days prior, in the way in which they are naturally asked to do so with regards to self-isolation. But of course, police presence. I've spoken today about enhanced police presence at ports and at borders and at airports. There will be an increase of around 1,000 targeted follow-up visits a day. And this, at a time when the numbers are reducing, speaks about the stringency of these measures, and that speaks to the point about giving assurance around these particular enforcement measures. I think it is disappointing, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman naturally being critical of government measures. I said yesterday, I've said on a number of occasions, I'll say it again today, from January last year, we have had a layered approach to our measures at the border. This is clearly about, through the travel ban, having a ban on travel from countries that pose a risk, high-risk countries, and there are measures in place that I've outlined. We're building upon those. But I think for his party in particular, to claim that they've been calling for tougher restrictions since the start of this pandemic is absolute nonsense, because it's simply not the case. They themselves have been flip-flopping, as I said yesterday again, in terms of calling quarantine a blunt tool, a blunt instrument. Shadow Transport Secretary saying that quarantine measures should be lessened. There is inconsistency clearly in the position of the party opposite, and we have always taken an approach to manage risk. On the point that he makes with regards to support packages, there's work taking place across government. That's other government departments, but we're working together on that. In terms of discussions with hotel chains, those discussions naturally are underway. That's not for me right now to talk about those discussions, but there's a lot of work taking place. And I think, again, it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to recognise that these measures and all measures have logistical and operational implications as well as challenges. We will work through those practicalities with all our stakeholders, all our partners. My colleagues in government will come to the House, as the Honourable Gentleman would expect, to provide the updates, whether it's on hotels, whether it's on sectoral packages, the dialogues that are taking place. And I would just finally like to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the British public absolutely recognise that this is a deeply, deeply challenging period for our country. No one will dispute that these are difficult times throughout this global pandemic, but there is no simple or single binary approach that can be taken. It is right that we manage risk. It is right that we do so in this layered approach. But also, I think the British public, our constituents in particular, Madam Deputy Speaker, they'd like to see all political parties come together at this important time to look at how we can bring in these measures and support these measures so that we can protect public health.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I very much welcome the evidence and nuance-based approach that the Home Secretary has outlined today, as opposed to a blanket approach that seems to be advocated by her shadow, which I believe would lead to impacts on trade and those that do need essential business, our ability to actually hotel quarantine so many people. And I know that he takes seriously the need of the aviation industry. I don't believe a blanket approach would do anything for that, so I welcome the government's approach. Can I ask the Home Secretary this? Knowing that some countries may be added on, and indeed some countries may be taken off the list where hotel quarantine is required, will that criteria be published, and also will it be subject to both further scrutiny and perhaps votes from this place? Thank you.
This is some important points, and he's absolutely right. I stood here yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the dispatch box, speaking about the importance of freight and the work the government has done over recent months, in fact, at Christmas, the run up to Christmas, to keep freight moving, despite various closures of borders that took place, which completely make the Honourable Gentleman's point that you simply cannot have that viable approach. There are logistical and operational challenges, and clearly government is working through many of these. He makes some important points, obviously, about changes to guidance, changes to advice across government, so from the Department of Health to the Department of Transport to the FCDO, who play a very important role here as well, in terms of public communications and assurance to the public around countries and changes that take place. Clearly, government will publish that. Government will come to the House, to the Commons, to share that information. I would just like to conclude my comments, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying, though, the current guidance is clear that people should be staying at home unless they've got really exceptional reasons to travel. And, of course, going on holiday is not a justifiable excuse or reason.
Now we go to the spokesman for the SNP, Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. My Scottish Government colleagues are concerned, as she knows that her proposals don't go far enough, and I would be grateful if she would confirm that she will listen to their representations. It is, of course, her department's responsibility to control the United Kingdom's external borders. Her department holds the passenger data, and the UK Border Force report to her. So it's right that the Home Secretary should be the one to address the risks raised by transmission of the virus by arrivals from abroad. So I'm going to repeat the questions I asked yesterday during the urgent question on this same topic, and which the Home Secretary did not answer at that time. I hope that, having had 24 hours notice to think about my questions and to discuss them with her colleagues and advisers, she will now answer them. In April and May of last year, I wrote to her asking for comprehensive health protections at the UK's external borders, and I referred to the measures that were being introduced in other countries in Europe and across the world. Other honourable members in the Home Affairs Committee were making similar requests backed up by evidence. Last week, the Home Secretary admitted that we were right, and she said that she thought the United Kingdom should have closed its borders earlier. So can she now tell me why she failed to take the precautions that she knew were needed at the start of the pandemic? What stopped her from closing the borders? Was it her cabinet colleagues? And if so, why did she not resign and speak out, given the increased risk of transmission from people entering the country? And finally, have the government commissioned an assessment of what contribution the failure to close the borders earlier has made to the dreadful death toll across the United Kingdom? And will she put the results in the public domain? These are questions which concern not just my constituents and those of my SNP colleagues, but they concern people across the 4 nations. So will she please answer them? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, first of all, I will repeat very much what I said yesterday about working with all the devolved administrations, and clearly the government is doing that, and the Right Honourable Lady will be well aware of that. With regards to everyone now going retrospective in terms of thinking that they were first advocates of bringing in health measures at the border, clearly that was not the case. And I recall this from the Select Committee last April, and I mentioned that yesterday as well. And if I can reacquaint the Right Honourable Lady with the measures that had been brought in from January 2020, from the minutes of self-isolation advice that was given from the FCO at the time, from SAGE recommendations around self-isolation for specific countries, from the 10th of February to the new regulations and statutory instruments that were brought in, new powers for medical professionals and the police to detain individuals suspected of symptoms of COVID, to the guidance to UK airports, to the travel advice that was put out from the FCDO, all between February and March, as self-isolation measures introduced for specific countries, introducing mandatory quarantine, the passenger locator form as well back in June last year, to closing the border to Denmark with the first identification of a new strain, which of course we were able to deal with because of our genomic sequencing capacity in the UK, from test and release to banning flights from South Africa, which clearly is still in place, to carrier liability for pre-travel testing and pre-travel tests. These measures, each of these measures, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have introduced, have added another layer of protection against transmission of the virus, and that reduces the risk of new dangerous strains being imported into the UK. And I think the Honourable Lady should also, Right Honourable Lady, should reflect upon the fact that there is not a single measure that mitigates risk entirely. Every measure that has been brought in helps to reduce risk, helps to protect the vaccine, and importantly, helps to protect the British public and public health.
Sir Graham Brady.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. I agree with the Chairman of the Select Committee. With 1 million British jobs dependent on aviation and much of British commerce as well, the government must be right to be taking an evidence-based approach, not a blanket approach. Whilst we all hope that we will discover that the new variants are combated just as effectively by the vaccines as the existing variants in this country. If it were to be the case that new countries needed to be added to the red list, will she speak urgently to our Right Honourable friend the Chancellor about the support that will be needed by our aviation sector to prevent a massive hemorrhaging of jobs and prospects across much of the country?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in speaking of the sector, and he's a powerful advocate for the sector as well. And I know of his constituency interest with Manchester Airport Group and the work that he's conducted with them as well. There is no question, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said yesterday, I'll emphasise this again, that the sector, they are our partners. They are the operational partners who we work with every single day, my colleagues in Border Force, for example. But specifically in terms of new additional lists or travel bans, basically, to specific countries, that work is always under review. And alongside that, we continue to work with our operational partners. We discuss with them, obviously, the implications of this. Those discussions will always continue, and government will always step up in whichever way it can to provide the necessary support needed.
Now we go to the Chairman of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome these measures, but they don't go far enough to deliver a comprehensive system. We know the Brazil and South Africa variant have already been identified across several continents, and in the first wave, less than 1% of new cases came from China. The overwhelming majority from European countries the government said were low risk at that time. So can I ask the Home Secretary about the number of people likely to still be arriving who are not covered by quarantine hotels, still won't have to do further tests on arrival, and will be able to go straight onto the public transport system from Heathrow or wherever they arrive? Can she confirm, is that likely to still be thousands of people each day? And does she think that is wise?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question. I think, first of all, it's important, and I come back to this point, that all the measures, every measure that has been introduced across government has provided degrees of protection, various layers and levels of protection against transmission of the virus. The Right Honourable Lady has heard me say already that travel is down from 90% compared to this time last year. Clearly, there are travel bans in place for countries that are red listed, and that'll continue. And the announcement today will also reduce the number of travelling passengers. I do want to emphasise that, because people should simply not be travelling. And we see the examples, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will call some of them out. I mean, Border Force have given me examples where even at St Pancras, people have been turning up with their skis. That is clearly not acceptable. We see plenty of influencers on social media showing off about which parts of the world that they are in, mainly in sunny parts of the world. Going on holiday is not an exemption, and it's important that people stay at home. I would just like to say, of course, that with regards to the measures that are being announced today, and also with regards to quarantining, the hotel measures and package in particular, the hotel package that's under discussion right now, clearly, in terms of the application of that and the administration of that, and the Right Honourable Lady speaks about people getting on public transport. We want to absolutely reduce the risk of people travelling in that way, and therefore these are measures that government are working through right now in terms of how people can travel to hotels, how they will quarantine, and I've already spoken about the checks that will also be put in place on individuals when it comes to self-isolation.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for a statement. Marjorie from Crook got in touch with me today. Like many of my North West Durham constituents, Marjorie is fed up of Labour playing politics with coronavirus. The Shadow Home Secretary himself has criticised our border measures before as a blunt tool. Today he's saying they don't go far enough. It's like some twisted version of Goldilocks, where the government solution is never just right. Does my right honourable friend agree with Marjorie that it's irresponsible to play politics with coronavirus? And will she also ensure that if these measures need to be extended further to other countries, they'll be done so at the earliest opportunity?
My friend is absolutely right, and I agree with everything he says about the party opposite in terms of their flip-flopping, but also their claims. And I would just like to praise Marjorie as well for, the points that she has made. I think she speaks for the British public, who are fed up with party politics being played at this critical time, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the public want to see unity rather than the type of gripes that we are seeing and hearing, or the approach of armchair generals in particular. But he asked an important question about, rolling out further travel bans to other countries. The government will absolutely not hesitate. If there are new strains emerging from other countries, the government will take action, which is exactly what Marjorie and the British public would expect.
Now we go to Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for the advance sight of her statement. Many of those that will be caught by these new measures will be travelling as a result of family bereavement and will already have incurred substantial cost very often at short notice. So can the Home Secretary tell me if there will be some sort of financial assistance available for people of modest means who find themselves in this position at that most difficult of times?
Well, my right honourable friend is, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right in terms of highlighting the exceptional examples and the sad examples that, you know, circumstances for people to travel, bereavement being a terrible, terrible case. The government is already in discussions with regards to exemptions and support packages and things of that nature. I'm unable, Madam Deputy Speaker, to confirm the details right now because this work is underway. But, you know, it's a matter of time before my colleagues will obviously notify the House and share further information on this.
Now we go to Sir David Amos.
I very much support and welcome my right honourable friend's announcement of restrictions at our borders as a result of the current health crisis. Would she reassure me that regional airports such as Southend will be tasked to strictly enforce these rules, as a number of local residents have expressed concerns that coronavirus infections may be transmitted by arrivals through the airport?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I can understand why he's raising the importance of regional airports throughout this pandemic. They have played an important role. All airport operators take responsibility for the way in which they work with us, but also for enforcing coronavirus measures and restrictions, so that's social distancing and keeping passengers apart, particularly as they go up to PCPs and obviously then come across border force officers. It is absolutely right that airports who are our operational partners work with us to take responsibility, that shared responsibilities I've spoken about so frequently, in terms of checking with the carriers that the carriers and the passenger locator form is completed, but also ensuring that they themselves put those protective measures in place to stop the spread of this virus.
Now we go to Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very concerned about the continued threat of COVID-19 to frontline border force staff at Heathrow, as the new draconian fixed team working rosters have made social distancing difficult at the same time as COVID transmission rates have been at their highest. So can the Home Secretary confirm reports that COVID secure bubbles have repeatedly been breached due to understaffing and the new fixed rosters, and specifically outline what assessment she's made of the adequacy of all border force staff's working conditions?
Thank the honourable lady for her question, and it is an important question in terms of border force staff. Border force staff are on the front line day in, day out, trying to protect the public from the spread of this virus, and they are doing exceptional work. And yesterday, I thank them for the work that they are doing. In terms of measures that are in place to protect them, I'm absolutely focused on protecting our border force staff. It's absolutely right that that takes place. The head of border force, my colleagues across the border force team have been working assiduously with all border force colleagues, particularly at Heathrow Airport, because Heathrow Airport is a busy airport, as we saw on Saturday night, where queues did form because obviously we are enforcing 100% compliance checks. And with that, of course, I come back to my point, working with Heathrow Airport Limited in terms of the measures that they are putting in place for social distancing, keeping passengers distant from border force staff, and of course ensuring that our staff, my staff, are protected. That is my #1 priority.
Now we go to Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I support the proportionate approach that my right honourable friend has adopted. But can she help me in relation to two linked matters? She said that she will be looking urgently at the exceptions. Will she particularly bear in mind the need to make provision for those who may be repatriated for urgent medical treatment? And should the extension, we hope it does not, at any time involve any British overseas territory, would she bear in mind the need for early consultation with them? We hope it never comes to it. But again, we have medical and other obligations in some cases to them.
My right honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, is absolutely right. The case of medical exemptions and urgencies have always been on the exemption list. The exemption list is under review right now. Colleagues across government, across all government departments, are reviewing the exemption list. And when changes are made, they will be publicised through the usual channels. And of course, anything that would affect overseas territories will also be under consideration, and that will also be put in the public domain.
And now we go to Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened very carefully to the Home Secretary's answer to the chair of the Select Committee earlier, and she didn't answer a rather direct and important question, which she will have estimates for, because this will be a policy based on evidence. How many people does she expect each day to have to go into quarantine in a hotel? And how many people entering the UK each day does she estimate will not have to go into quarantine under these new measures?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think first of all it's important to recognise we do have numbers in terms of the number of people coming through our border every single day. These new measures, though, and I think it's important to put this into context, these new measures will bring those numbers even further down. So we still have a lot of British nationals that are travelling, and clearly the advice is, and the guidance is clear, people should not be travelling, they should be staying at home. And through the enforcement measures, that will reduce dramatically. And the government is already working out capacity in terms of hotel accommodation and also the, in light of the period of self-isolation that will be required. And government will happily share those figures with colleagues in due course.
Now we go to Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is absolutely right that the government take necessary and appropriate steps to keep our country safe from these new variants of the virus that are emerging around the world. And I welcome the Home Secretary's statement. But she will know that any additional restrictions on travel will further damage the aviation sector that has been deeply impacted by this pandemic. When businesses in other sectors have been forced to close or unable to trade because of restrictions, specific financial support has been made available. So can I ask the Home Secretary if she will talk to the Secretary of State for Transport and the Chancellor to see what specific support can now be provided for airlines and airports to ensure that they are in a position to help lead our recovery in the future?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to give my honourable friend every assurance that we are working together across transport, the Treasury, the Foreign Office with regards to the aviation and the travel sector. Conversations and discussions are underway. As I said earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are our operational partners. We work collectively with them, so those discussions are underway, and I'd just like to give them that assurance.
And now we go to Steve McCabe.
How will the quarantine hotels be selected? And will the Home Secretary set a limit on how far such a hotel can be from the arrival airport so as to minimise risks during transfers, for which I assume she will also be responsible?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, with regards to hotels and measures, as I've indicated already, that work is underway in terms of looking at procurement of hotels, who the partners are going to be, but also further information around them. So government will be setting out over the next few days, the coming days, further information with regards to hotels and the processes around them. That work, as I indicated earlier on, there are logistical and operational aspects that we are in discussions underway right now, and so my colleagues will come back to the House and provide that information.
Now we go to Deanna Davison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. Protecting the British people quite rightly has to be our priority, and so it is right that our border measures have been under constant review since the pandemic began. But in light of today's announcement, can my right honourable friend confirm that our border force and other frontline emergency workers will be given all the support they need to enforce these rules so that they can keep themselves and the British public safe?
Friend is absolutely right. Border Force are doing incredible work on the front line, and I'm seeing that and getting reports of that every single day. It's important that they stay safe, which is why we have strong measures in place for them. But alongside that, clearly, enforcement, whether it's through policing, the IAS service, all of that has absolutely been accelerated, along with the checks. The fact of the matter is we do have clear checks. Passenger locator form must be completed. There are fines for non-compliance. There's a requirement for self-isolation for arrivals. These measures and these checks are in place, and they will be increased clearly to protect public health.
And now we go to Stephen Bonner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has been widely reported that the Home Secretary called for tougher sanctions at the border than these somewhat reduced measures she is announcing here today. Has she been overruled and undermined yet again?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I reiterate, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I'd refer the gentleman to my statement and the measures that have been announced. It's important to recognise that every single measure that has been put in place, including a ban on international travel for high-risk countries, they are in place to protect the British public. And these measures, along with all the other measures announced today, are part of this layer of protection to reduce transmission of the virus and reduce new risks of a new dangerous variant coming into the United Kingdom.
And now we go to... Oh, I wasn't expecting to go to... Do we not have...
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, they're making a statement on quarantine for arrivals into the UK. She said that police would be stepping up checks for self-isolation. Those travelling from red list countries who cannot be refused entry, i.e. UK residents, will have to isolate in government accommodation for 10 days with no exceptions. Anyone wishing to travel must fill in a declaration form as to why they need to. Going on holiday, she said, is not a valid reason, and anyone without a valid reason will be sent home or issued with a fine. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Westminster. There has been much debate over the last couple of weeks about how far this quarantine should extend. It's a fairly limited announcement we've had today, John.
Clearly, there's been a split amongst the top levels of the cabinet with those. I mean, we know that Priti Patel has been telling people she wanted a blanket ban. She said so in a talk to some Conservative activists. This was raised actually by Nick Thomas-Symonds in the exchanges just now. Yes, it's just travel from hotspots. What's quite tough and is new is the fact that you're going to have to fill in a form and say why you're travelling. And there was quite a colourful anecdote from Priti Patel in answer to one MP's questions. She said there have been stories of people turning up at St Pancras with skis to go on skiing holidays. So she was talking about going on holiday is not an essential, not essential travel. Now, there's been quite a clash between Priti Patel and Labour's Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Shadow Home Secretary. She's accused him of playing politics. She's claimed Labour are armchair generals. And he, in return, has said that the borders risk being the Achilles heel in the fight against COVID. While all this has been happening, up in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has been hitting out on the subject of essential travel on reports that the Prime Minister is due to travel to Scotland later this week. She says, me travelling from Edinburgh to Aberdeen to visit a vaccine centre is not essential. Boris Johnson travelling from London to wherever in Scotland to do the same is not essential. If we're asking other people to abide by that, I'm sorry, it's incumbent on us to do likewise. I think we're going to hear a bit more about that row over the next 24 hours or so, if the Prime Minister is planning a visit to Scotland. But clearly in the House of Commons, she has confirmed what many of us have been expecting, that there is going to be this ban on people coming in from the quarantine plan for people coming in from overseas, but it is only hotspot countries. It's not a blanket ban, and the government's opponents are saying she's not going far enough. But we know that she's advocated inside the cabinet for tougher rules. Clearly, she appears to have been overruled by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor.
And John, prior to the Home Secretary, we heard from the Prime Minister himself with an announcement on schools.
Well, he began actually by stealing the Home Secretary's announcement about travel restrictions. But yes, the Prime Minister had, in his news conference last night, he said he was going to provide some sort of route out of the lockdown. Well, what we had today was a bit of a timetable from the Prime Minister. So no end to current restrictions in England prior to school half-term. There will be a review during half-term. The government will come back to the Commons when MPs are back immediately after half-term. So that's probably that'll be the week beginning the 22nd of February. But what he did announce was that schools will be the first thing to reopen if it's considered safe for them to do so, and that will begin the 8th of March. Now, it sounds very much like a target, and of course it also means there'll be no restriction. If schools are first, it means there are no reopening of pubs, restaurants and non-essential retail and so on until probably sometime after March the 8th. This was the Prime Minister making his announcement about that March the 8th date.
If we achieve our target of vaccinating everyone in the four most vulnerable groups with their first dose by the 15th of February, and every passing day sees more progress towards that goal, then those groups that have developed immunity from the virus about 3 weeks later, that is by the 8th of March, we hope it will therefore be safe to begin the reopening of schools from Monday the 8th of March.
So, Mr Johnson has been insisting today that schools are safe. He's been reminded by Sir Keir Starmer that he called them vectors for transmission back in January. I must say one of the features of today's two statements and indeed Prime Minister's questions is that the Prime Minister's been much more combative. Yesterday we saw, last night at the news conference, a very sombre tone from the Prime Minister as he marked that tragic milestone of 100,000 COVID deaths in the UK, saying how sorry he was and also that he believed he'd done all he could. Today he really took the fight to Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions and in the statement this afternoon, and we've seen quite a bit of that from Priti Patel as well. So after a sombre tone yesterday, government pleasing its own backbenchers with the dates of when some of the restrictions may be changed and when schools might start to go back, but a bit of a real clash between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition and